Hello and welcome to Conversations with Mother Earth, brought to you by Grounded Press. My name is Dana Petrovic, and each week my guests and I explore one aspect of Mother Earth and the gifts that she gives us. We also discuss why these gifts are so precious and why we should value them. We got you curious? Good. We love curiosity. Let's start. Today's conversation with Mother Earth will be a bit different, but not so surprising, considering the various topics we have covered so far. My guest in this episode is Professor Xiongbo Shi, who is based in China, Shenzhen, as I am right now. This episode will be a combination of an online and a face-to-face meeting. But before we start, I have a question for you. Do you remember being taught handwriting? In my childhood in the former Yugoslavia, we were duty-bound by our teachers to write in a very precise way with all the alphabet letters slanted slightly to the right. More recently in my life, when I started to learn the Mandarin language, I became fascinated with the writing of Chinese characters. They seem to be an art form. What astounded me was the strict rigor and discipline that is applied to writing Chinese characters. Each stroke must follow a long-established order of movement and even a certain rhythm of motion. Calligraphy is also held in high esteem across East Asia, like in Japan and Korea. We even talk about calligraphy in the episode about sculpture on 3rd January. In this episode, we will focus on China, though. My guest today can share deep insights about Chinese calligraphy. He is assistant professor at Shenzhen University and has studied art history in Christchurch, New Zealand, and in Nanjing, China. He has also written scholarly articles and books about calligraphy. Professor Xiongbo Shi, welcome to Conversations with Mother Earth.
Thank you for having me.
Xiongbo, you have written many articles on the aesthetics of calligraphy. What is meant by this, and what personally motivated you to pursue interest in this discipline?
Aesthetics is a branch of philosophy that deals with the nature of beauty and taste. It is often used loosely to refer to the philosophy of art. So by the aesthetics of Chinese calligraphy, I mean the philosophy of this art. And the issues discussed would cover the forms, the creation, and the appreciation of this art. And what motivated me to spend 3 to 4 years writing a thesis on this art, I think when I look back at my childhood, my first contact with Chinese calligraphy, an image started to emerge. It was my first calligraphy teacher, and my first Chinese teacher, Warsaw. He was a middle-aged man crippled by polio from any age. I don't quite remember what he taught in my first calligraphy lesson, but his gestures demonstrating the calligraphic brush strokes in front of his class have lingered in my mind. His back is bent, his left hand trembles involuntarily as he holds the brush, as if every stroke would take all of his strength. And that was 28 years ago, and I believe it planted a seed for my academic pursuit. Yes.
That's a beautiful story. How the hardships actually inspired you to pursue this. Yes, we experienced something similar here in Shenzhen, where we bought a painting, also painted by disabled men, and always inspires me whenever whenever I look at it, to overcome obstacles, because I thought if this person can overcome obstacles and paint such a beautiful painting, I can also do it.
Yeah, there's definitely devotion and love, yeah, behind this mastery of the techniques of the calligraphic brush strokes. And I think we will discuss this aspect later in our show. Yes.
Conversation. Yes, exactly. But what's
Yes.
interesting, Xiongbo, is that the Westerners' interest in Chinese arts and material culture, such as Chinese paintings and ceramics, dates back several hundreds of years.
Yes.
However, on the other side, it was not until the last century that the Chinese calligraphy started to attract the attention of the West. Why did it take us so long to appreciate this art? Why did the West take such a long time?
I think a fundamental obstacle to appreciating Chinese calligraphy is the fact that calligraphy is no parallel in the Western civilizations. And as a result, the very existence of this art could not immediately register in the consciousness of any Western travelers to China. The reason is that usually people do not see, they only recognize. And what we do not recognize remains invisible to us. For centuries, foreign visitors to China, even if they were highly educated, remain simply blind to the Chinese art of calligraphy. Another difficulty for the Westerners to appreciate calligraphy is that this art is intimately linked with Chinese language. But I think this aspect is secondary. As the sinologist Simon Nays said, to what extent is it necessary to be able to read Chinese in order to enjoy Chinese calligraphy? Preliminary answer to may be provided in the form of another question. That is, to what extent is it necessary to be able to read music in order to enjoy a musical performance? Yes.
Yeah, that's a very good, exactly. That's a very good comparison. I'm glad that this has changed in the last years, that we do see beauty in calligraphy, that we do appreciate that. Your academic background is in art history. So tell us, when did calligraphy become as a fine art in Chinese culture? And what's the background?
Sure. We know from reliable sources, reliable historical documents, that by the 1st century, during the Han Dynasty, the calligraphy already was regarded as fine art. As a result, educated people began to collect calligraphy by inspired hands and spend much time practicing this art. And by the Han Dynasty, some calligraphic works were already being created purely for artistic appreciation. That is not for utilitarian purposes, a tradition that continues today. As to the social background, I think during the Han Dynasty, the importance of writing for good government was widely recognized. The Han Dynasty administration depended heavily upon written documents, the census data, the reports of bureaucratic performance, tax figures, and materials on public policy. All of this should be clearly recorded by hand, of course. So good writing became the foundation of good government, and the skill in writing was one criterion for selecting government officials. And this remained the case in later imperial dynasties. In Imperial China, good calligraphy was regarded as a reflection of a high level of cultural achievement. And such cultural achievement was requisite for employment in high government positions. So good calligraphy was always necessary for success in the state examinations. There was no separate calligraphy section in the imperial examination, but this only demonstrate that how much it was taken for granted. If a candidate had a poor calligraphy, examiners would not take his or her examination seriously. And for this reason, one can assume that virtually all scholar officials who passed the imperial examinations were competent calligraphers, at least to the extent that the writing would be neat and stylistically correct.
Very interesting. Fascinating insight, Xiongbo, because we talked about this in episode number 8 when we talked about poetry. So to become a bureaucrat in the Han Dynasty, one not only had to have a neat writing of calligraphy, but also one had to compose a poem, had to write a poem. And this is that's why Chinese poetry is so deep and so beautiful. So this is really interesting how much work a candidate had to put into becoming a government official or a government worker. And of course, it's understandable that because the documents documented the events, so one had to be able to read them later on. So of course, understandable that the writing, that the calligraphy had to be neat. Can you tell our listeners just briefly to understand from the timeline, when was the time of the Han Dynasty?
I think if I remember correctly, the Han Dynasty runs from the 2nd century BC to the 2nd century AD. Yeah, a few hundred years. Yeah.
So about 2,000 years ago, over 2,000 years ago, a government official had to have a clean, neat calligraphy writing style and had to be versed in poetry.
Yes.
That's a long time ago. Yeah, that's a long time ago. Yes.
Yeah, I think when you just talk about calligraphy or handwriting was used during the Han Dynasty, for example, in composing poems. A point need to be raised here is when we are talking about appreciating the art of Chinese calligraphy, we are actually talking about the calligraphic forms and not necessarily about the literary content of the calligraphic works. So by which I mean calligraphic appreciation is more about appreciating the forms, the lines, and the inks, in the monochrome inks of calligraphic works, and not so much about what calligraphic work about the literary content, not so much about the literary content of the calligraphic work. Yeah, I want to raise this point because it's quite important for this art.
Important point, because today, as you said, today is, and we'll talk about this in more depth in a moment, today is really just about the form of writing. You just reminded me of the episode that we did on Chinese poetry a few months ago, where I was astounded that this was one of the part of the requirement to become a government official, because in other parts of the world, poetry is regarded something as the art form outside, yet in China, this was completely different. So, but thank you. Yes, today we are focusing on the form and the quality of a good calligraphy. And one of the things that are interesting here in China, when we talk about present days, about today, when children start to study calligraphy today in China, their parents or teachers would give them the canonical works of masters to imitate. So this practice of art, in a sense, involves to copy ancient masterworks of art. And so, of course, this poses the question, why is that? Would that be, in a sense, an obstacle to creativity or innovation in this art?
Yes, this is a very important or a very vital question for us to understand Chinese calligraphy. Indeed, copying and imitating the canonical classical works from its previous masters is an important and indispensable part of calligraphic training. And just as great composers of Europe continue to study and practice past masterpieces even after they developing their own styles, so did many Chinese literary artists. They maintain lifelong dialogues with classical masters through the study and reperformance of the works. For them, rewriting classical masterpieces, it was a normal activity of daily life. Through rewriting canonical works, artists and calligraphers learned many subtleties of technique and artistic vocabularies that might easily have been missed by the beginners. And while the calligraphic practice as well as criticism features the past and the copying of the past models, the past masters, for Chinese calligraphers, it is by no means the goal to be a follower of previous masters. Anxiety for many calligraphers is the fear that they will be called a slave writer, and this is a unique aspect of Chinese aesthetics. The novelty, the creativity comes from a complete mastery of the past. It is believed that long-lasting copying practice and complete mastery of pre-existing skills on the part of calligraphy practitioner will lead to newness and innovation. And this is an irony, actually, inattention in this art. That is, one gave up freedom in order to attain freedom.
Yeah. That's fascinating. That's really interesting. Never thought of that way, but it's not different. And in a sense, we have something similar in Europe with Pablo Picasso. It's a fascinating biography of, or a fascinating life of Pablo Picasso, for example, because he, as a little kid, back then there was no photography, so his father was responsible for copying reality onto paper. And so Pablo Picasso learned at a very, very young age to be very precise. If he would make a drawing of a dove, of a bird, it would be very, very precise. And he learned with time to actually get away from this precision. And there's a beautiful quote of his where he says, "It takes a long time to become a child." And so he actually, because he was not able to have that as a child, because he had to be very precise in copying or reprinting the reality, he actually abstracted from reality later. So he also had, in a sense, is very similar to what calligraphy artists have to do here in China.
Yeah, I think artistic skills is a requisite for both Western and Eastern artists. Yeah, the skills involved in every kind of art, and that is needed for artistic creativity, artistic creation. Yeah, and that's the same. Yeah, no matter where an artist is. Yeah.
Yes, exactly, exactly. Because art connects us no matter where we are.
Yes.
The expression of art.
Xiongbo, after I started learning Chinese and writing Chinese characters, I of course did in pencil, not knowing better. But with time, I learned that there are other tools that you actually use in calligraphy, like a brush, like ink, inkstone, even something like paperweights and desk pads. So how do you use these tools? Can you demonstrate us?
What we have here on the table, we have the inkstone, the brush, the ink, prepared ink, and the paper. These are the four essential tools for calligraphic creation. And in traditional China, in every scholars or officials study room, you will find them. And the four of them are also called the four treasures of the study room in traditional China. So let's start with the writing brush. And Chinese calligraphic brush is made of animal hairs. For example, the goat's hair or the hair of the rabbit. Yeah. The brush is, I would say, the single most important instrument tool for this art. It's a very sensitive instrument, and the mastery of the brush will require high level on the part of the calligrapher, mental concentration, physical balance, and muscular control. It is like a seismograph of the calligrapher's mind, answering every pressure, every turn of the wrist. And for the paper, the Chinese paper was invented no later than the 2nd century AD, and also in the Han Dynasty, and it was soon became readily available and widely used by scholars and writers. And this is, we should bear in mind, this is very important for the emergence of this art in the very beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And the Chinese paper, the paper used for Chinese calligraphy creation has an absorbent quality. That is, the slightest drop of ink, the lightest touch of the brush register at once on the paper. Yeah.
No mistakes allowed.
No mistakes allowed. This is a medium that tolerates no error, no mistake, no hesitation. Yes. And the ink. In traditional China, we use a ink stick rather than prepared ink as we have here. You grind the ink stick against the ink stone, and then we have this ink powder, and you mix this powder with water to produce usable ink for calligraphy. And well, today prepared ink is quite popular because it's just convenient.
Exactly,
Yes,
exactly.
yes.
But the old masters, when they traveled, they didn't want to risk that they lose their ink, so they
Yes.
inkstone was a safer way.
Yes,
You know,
exactly.
you can always add water to
Yes.
it, and you always have ink.
Yes, exactly.
Fascinating,
Yes.
fascinating.
Yes.
Yeah, it's really fascinating.
Mm.
Are there rules how to hold the brush?
Basically, there are two main methods to holding the brush. I will show both of them.
Mm-hmm.
And the first one is called the double hook. The first one is called the double hook method, which is also called the 5-finger method. And the second one is called the single hook method, as you can see here. And the difference between these two methods is for the double hook, you have the forefinger, and the middle finger hooks the brush. And for the single hook, you have only the second finger, its forefinger hooks brush. And for many Chinese theorists and calligraphers, the 5-finger method, that is the double hook method, is recommended because this method employs all of the 5 fingers. Yeah, that is the forefinger and the middle finger. They play the part of moving the brush, twist the brush, and that is the middle finger could move the brush downward or to the right, and the ring finger could lift the brush upwards and to the left. Yeah, and this little finger plays part of a conductor and supports this this ring finger. Yeah, so all of these 5 fingers play a part in this handling of the brush. And of course, the thumb and forefinger is most important because they receive strength from the wrist and the arm and even your whole body. Yeah, that's basically the 2 main methods to holding the brush.
So our fingers become an orchestra. It's like a symphony, or like they all play a part.
Yes. And you have to hold the brush very tightly. Yeah, the control. The control is very important. The tightly controlling of the brush is very important. Yeah, and that requires a long time's training. Yeah.
Okay.
As I mentioned at the beginning, there is in Chinese language an exactitude in strokes. And there's I read that there are while learning Chinese, there are 8 strokes in Chinese language. Actually, I had to learn them at the beginning myself. Can you tell us more about these essential 8 strokes that are actually fundamental for the Chinese language?
Yes, I think it's possible for me to enlarge your question. That is, when you mentioned the 8 basic strokes, and actually we're talking about the 8 basic strokes of the regular script.
Of the
regular script. And
simplified.
for Chinese calligraphy, we have 5 main scripts. That is the regular script, the sleeve script, the cursive script, the rounding script. What else? The rounding script. Yeah, these are 5 main scripts. And when the beginners, as what you said, the 8 basic strokes, they refer to the 8 basic brush strokes of the regular script. And all of these 8 basic strokes are found in single one Chinese character, and that is called Yong, which means eternity. So I would say there's no much mystery about these 8 basic principles.
So they're the fundamental tools.
Fundamental tools.
Yes, right.
Yeah, this character contains these 8 basic strokes, such as the dot, the horizontal stroke, the vertical stroke, the hook. Yeah, these are the basic strokes. Yeah, these are the components for every Chinese character, and that makes the exact handwriting, exact mastery of these brush strokes essential for the practice of this art.
This is something that actually everybody can understand. Can you demonstrate to my listeners and viewers how we Westerners can appreciate the Chinese calligraphy without even knowing the Chinese language? How is that possible? And maybe you can show us the tools that you're using and write, do a little bit of writing. Would that be possible?
Sure. Yeah.
We use the paper weight, that is to make the paper flat, suitable for calligraphic practice or calligraphic creation. And we use prepared ink. What I put down on this piece of paper are 8 characters. You could say it's a couplet. Basically, it means the cool winds, bright moon. Those who are at nature can obtain them. And for Chinese calligraphic practice and creation, normally the practitioners and calligraphers often choose poetic text for the creation. I think that is readily sensible to Chinese scholars and also for the Westerners. Yeah. But the appreciation of this art, the appreciation of Chinese calligraphy, does not necessarily require that everyone should be able to read Chinese. By which I mean, as we have discussed in this episode, there are 3 aspects of the 3 formal aspects of this art. So for a Westerner, for a foreigner who does not know Chinese language, who cannot recognize Chinese characters, we can start with the formal aspects. And first and foremost, we can start with the brush strokes. As we said, we can understand Chinese calligraphic work as a compilation of progressive calligraphic lines. Every character is composed of several strokes, and you can follow the progression of the strokes in a piece of work from the first to the last. And when you appreciate Chinese calligraphic work, you start from the top right, and that's where the calligrapher started his piece of his calligraphic creation, and you read from the top to the bottom, from right to the left. So in this sense, you can understand Chinese calligraphy as an abstract art, and you try to imagine in your mind the bodily movement of the calligrapher, of the artist, by retracing the brush strokes in your mind, rewriting them in your mind. That is how such an effect came into being. You just try to imagine them, and you are on the right way to appreciate this art. I think another aspect which would be quite helpful for Westerners to understand this art is to pay attention to the inks, the variations of the inks, because far from being stable and monochrome, the inks actually offers a range of nuances, the shades, the thickness of the ink, the darkness of the ink, and also we have the dryness of the ink, the wetness of the ink, and also as like the creation of the individual brush strokes, you can kind of imagine when the calligrapher dip his brush in the inkstone and start a new brush stroke. Because, for example, here I feel the brush is quite dry, and I cannot go on with this dry brush. I have to dig my brush in the inkstone and start again with another stroke, with another character. And now you can sense the temporality. You can sense the temporal aspect of this Oriental art, and this is important for the appreciation of Chinese calligraphy. So that's basically my explanation for those who cannot read Chinese. I think these are efficacious, effective approach to this art.
In your articles, Xiongbo, you talk about the outer form and the inner qualities of calligraphy. What do you mean by this?
The outer form and the inner qualities, they are quite related. Basically, I think a piece of calligraphy is a group of progressive individual lines, and individual brush strokes can be regarded as the smallest unit of calligraphic work, such as the horizontal brush strokes, vertical lines, and the hook, the dots. These are the basic units, the basic components of calligraphic work. And they constitute, and the basic brush strokes, basic lines constitute the individual Chinese characters, the Chinese characters, yeah. And the compilation of the Chinese characters constitute the whole work, a whole calligraphic work. And every Chinese calligraphy teacher would direct the students' attention to these aspects. So the three aspects: individual brush stroke, character, and the overall composition. So these three aspects could be regarded as the outer form of calligraphy. And by inner or spiritual qualities of calligraphic work, I mean the subjectivity of the artist, his or her personality, sentiment, emotion, and intention would affect or participate in the calligraphic practice, in the calligraphic creation, and thus they are embodied in the calligraphic lines. So really, we cannot separate the outer form and the spiritual qualities. For the detection of the latter, for the detection of the spiritual qualities, requires a close look of the formal aspects of the lines, of the compositions, of the formal features of the work. Yes.
Interesting. We will talk about the brushstroke in a moment, where you will demonstrate to us a few brushstrokes. But before we use that, what I noticed, because I first started with a pencil when I started to write Chinese characters, but I learned that ink brush, ink, paper, and inkstone are essential implements of the Chinese calligraphy. I've even observed other tools like desk pads and paperweights. What is that we need to consider to use these tools, as if I can call them? What is the purpose? Tell us a little bit.
Yes. A Han Dynasty scholar once put it, one of the subtleties and of this art lies in the softness of the brush. And I think what he meant is not only just as brush, but also the other materials involved in this art. And today we will say the materiality, the medium of art actually plays a quite important role in a specific type of art. Yes, in traditional China, every scholar and every official study room has these four writing tools: the brush and the ink, the brush, the ink, and the inkstone, and the paper. We call the four of them the treasures of the study, the four treasures of study. And the brush is a Chinese writing brush. It's made of animal hairs, the goat's hair, the rabbit's hair. And this is a rather sensitive instrument and could be rather difficult to handle for beginners. In order to master the brush, the calligrapher has to achieve a high degree of mental concentration, and physical balance, and muscular control. Long years of intensive training are required to reach a minimum level of competence. And the brush acts like a seismograph of the mind, answering every pressure, every turn of the wrist. And paper was another important material for this art. It was invented no later than the 2nd century AD, that is also in the Eastern Han Dynasty, and it soon became readily available and widely used by Chinese officials. This is important for the emergence of this art. The paper used for calligraphy has absorbent quality, the lightest touch of the brush, the slightest drop of the ink register at once on the paper. And this is a medium that tolerates no error, no corrections, and no hesitation. The ink stick is made of oil, coal, or pine wood, animal glue, and perfume. Today, the prepared ink is quite popular in calligraphic practice, but traditionally we use ink stick or use the ink stick to grind the ink stick against the ink stone into powder. And this powder is then mixed with water in a well in the ink stone, in order to produce usable ink for calligraphy. The ink, far from being stable and monochrome, offers a wide range of nuances. Its shine, its depth, its blackness, its thickness, its dryness, and its wetness, echoing every mood and the inflection of the writing brush. Yeah. So all of the four treasures, all of these four tools, mediums are essential for not only for the emergence of this art, but also for the creativity and for the artistic appreciation of this art, I would say.
Yes, you're completely right. One really has to be concentrated, and you said control the moment, because every mistake is immediately recorded, because as we will see in a moment, the paper is really fine.
Yes.
And captures every single moment, can't fool the paper. Are there any rules on how to hold the brush? Perhaps you can demonstrate.
There are two ways of holding the brush. The first one is like this. It's called the double hook. It's a double hook. And for the double hook, you have the second finger and the middle finger hooking the brush, and the fourth ring finger actually resting the brush. And the double hook method, you have to employ all the five fingers. And another approach, another method of holding the brush is called the single hook. For the single hook, you use only the index finger, the second finger hooks brush, and the middle finger is resting the brush like this. Yeah, and these two methods of holding the brush are also are quite popular in pre-modern China. And if you study calligraphy today, a teacher probably would recommend the double hook, because in this method, the brush is quite stable because it has been stably rest between the fingers, and compared to single hook method, the double hook method, when you use double hook method, you have for the beginners, you have better control of the brush. It's easier for beginners to reach a balance, when you hold the brush.
What else about Chinese calligraphy is there that we have not discussed? I mean, the series is called Conversations with Mother Earth. Is there a connection to Mother Earth, to nature? And what else would you like to share with our audience?
Yes, the issue of the relationship between Chinese calligraphy and the external world is actually widely discussed by a lot of theorists. And this is actually quite an important issue in Chinese aesthetics, that is the relationship between Chinese art and nature. And it's actually a common saying in Chinese art criticism that calligraphy should imitate the shapes and forms of the natural world. For many, this would be rather confusing. After all, calligraphy, unlike painting, do not aim at pictorial representation of external objects. I think the point is that things in the natural world do not enter into calligraphic works as perceivable visual images. Rather, calligraphers, they gain inspiration from natural objects and then create calligraphic forms that embodies rhythm, the movement, and the spirit of the natural things. We have a lot of metaphorical sayings in Chinese calligraphy criticism, such as a dot should be like a falling stone from a high peak, a high cliff. This does not mean that the brush stroke dot should be a representation of the stone, but rather the calligrapher should produce a dot that has a momentum, has a propensity, just like the falling stone. I think this is rather important for us to appreciate this art. That is, even for the foreigners, even for the Westerners who have no idea, who have no knowledge of Chinese characters, who cannot read Chinese, we can still pay attention to, we can still focus on the shapes, the forms, the calligraphic lines, and try to appreciate, try to understand these lines, these strokes as imitation of the external objects, not the imitation of the images, not in the sense of the imitation of the image, but in the sense that the brush strokes, the lines, are imitation of the rhythm, of the movement of the external natural objects, the natural things. So this is a quite important issue in Chinese calligraphy. I think should be raised here.
That's
yeah.
One of the things that I love so much about Chinese art is that actually this the closeness to Mother Earth. And this is not only expressed, as you just demonstrated, in calligraphy. This is expressed in poetry. This is expressed in paintings with clear rules about the 6 laws on how to replicate nature in Chinese paintings, and also instruments, which really surprised me. Even the instruments are built to replicate sounds of nature, which we don't kind of consider with other instruments. And this gives this closeness to this depth, this sense of being grounded through art. So thank you for addressing that issue. I never kind of thought about that, because when you learn the language, you learn it from kind of more the practical aspect, but this closeness to nature, to Mother Earth, makes it really special.
Yes, and in the West and also in China, we talk about this conception of in harmony with the nature. And I think when it comes to Chinese art, not just Chinese calligraphy, this is a very important, a vital aspect. That is, Chinese artists always gain inspirations from the natural world, and for the artistic creation and the natural sources, the inspirations they gain from the natural world are very important, and it's also the aim, the goal, to realize the spirit, the rhythm of the natural world in their works, in their creations. Yeah, I think this is a very important aspect of Chinese artistic activities.
Yeah, Mother Earth inspires many artists around the world, but we don't kind of give her credit for that more here. You know, I think that credit is given more in the Chinese art, and that's one of the things I like about Chinese art so much. Xiongbo, thank you so much for your insights, and thank you for joining us. Writing Chinese calligraphy is a philosophic lesson in mindfulness. Dear listeners, as you have obviously seen, because you have to be fully present. As Xiongbo has demonstrated, to appreciate the beauty of all characters, you really have to pay attention. So I'm convinced that many of our listeners will want to know about calligraphy. What sources would you recommend?
I think a very good way to start, a very good place to start with Chinese calligraphy is is those museums, especially those big museums that have a fine collection of Chinese calligraphy and Chinese painting, such as the British Museum and the Metropolitan Museum in the United States. And actually their websites contain a lot of beautiful works, and for the beginners and for those who have an interest in Chinese calligraphy and painting to start. And normally the captions are quite detailed on the website. The captions of the calligraphic works and Chinese paintings are quite detailed, and those information would help us to have a better understanding of Chinese calligraphy and painting, and that's a very good way to start.
And where can our listeners find you, Xiongbo? Are you on social media?
Yes, I have Twitter, I have academia, and just Google my name, you will find my email address and also my academic affiliation. Yes,
and your LinkedIn profile. And this is how I found you. I actually Googled you, and I discovered you in the same city by Googling you.
Yes, and I think if we want to learn Chinese calligraphy, especially in this internet age, in this digitalized age, it would not hard for you to find materials to study. And we have you can find a lot of copy books, or calligraphic models, by, for example, just Google Chinese calligraphy copy books, Chinese calligraphy masterpieces. You will find a lot of works, and also on the YouTube, we could find a lot of very helpful videos. A lot of Chinese calligraphy teachers, they put the videos, upload the videos on YouTube, and you can learn Chinese calligraphy by watching those videos. And yes, that's actually what I have done during the past few years. Yes, I'm also in my free time, when I have time, I also practice this art. Yes.
That's great. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for sharing this beautiful insight, these deep insights about the Chinese calligraphy, your knowledge and your expertise with us, Xiongbo. Thank you for joining Conversations with Mother Earth. Thank
you for having me. It's really a great pleasure to talk about this art.
Wonderful. This concludes today's Conversation with Mother Earth, brought to you by Grounded Press. Looking ahead to next week, we will talk about shelter, which is a basic human need that not only provides personal safety and protection from the weather, but also a sense of dignity and the opportunity to lead a normal life. A shelter, a home, is a place where we shelter memories as well. So I am assured that next week's episode will indeed shelter you. So stay tuned.